Post-truth world, fake news. For those of you closer to my age, credibility gap. These expressions refer to our long history of struggling with facts and whether facts matter. I hope you are thinking, of course facts matter. I hope you will still think so 8 minutes from now. The people you see on the screen behind me were caught up in momentous historical events, World War II and the Holocaust, and they somehow came to remember those events and the parts they played in them incorrectly. These individuals engaged in extensive community outreach, wrote books and memoirs, and the internet is teeming with items presenting and repeating their stories, but their stories are in whole or in part false. The next few months will be punctuated by a string of 75th anniversaries of events occurring at the end of World War II. The first Nazi concentration camp with a large surviving population of inmates liberated by Americans was Buchenwald, liberated on April 11, 1945. Some of the people on the screen behind me became quite well known as liberators of Buchenwald, though their stories appear to be false memories. This gentleman is the late Frederick Rick Carrier. That screenshot is of a page in the Holocaust Encyclopedia section of the United States Holocaust Memorial Museum website that recognizes American liberators of the concentration camps. Carrier claimed to have been the first American soldier to have arrived at Buchenwald and to have played the pivotal role in liberating the camp. But there's good reason to believe that Carrier's liberation story is completely false. We can say this because we have contemporary prisoner accounts and Army records that show how the camp was really liberated, and Carrier's story conflicts with that record. Buchenwald was abandoned on April 11th. At about noon, the camp commandant announced over the loudspeaker system that all SS members should leave the camp immediately. Prisoner functionaries took over and maintained order. A few American troops briefly visited the camp around 5 p.m., called on the radio for other soldiers to come administer the camp, and moved on. The American soldiers did not crash through fences or engage in any combat. They simply walked or drove in through open gates or holes cut in the fences by newly freed prisoners. Rick Carrier's story had him arriving at the camp on April 10th, his 20th birthday, when Buchenwald was actually still firmly in Nazi hands. He reported witnessing a battle between prisoners and SS. No such battle took place, and returning to the camp the next morning to blow open the main gate with explosives, enabling the entry of a column of American troops and vehicles, which did not happen. There are many specific details in the historical record that allow us to say with certainty that Carrier's liberation story was false. The liberation of Buchenwald was a kind of perfect storm for future memory problems. Eisenhower insisted that the horrors of Buchenwald be widely publicized, and it was visited by reporters, groups of dignitaries, and thousands of American soldiers during the 2.5 months of American occupation. These soldiers were exposed to a whirlwind of sights and sounds as they raced across Germany in the final tumultuous days of the war, and sometimes confused one camp or town or event with another when they began to reflect on their wartime experiences. Survivors were subjected to starvation, weakened by forced labor, often fighting disease as they went about their daily struggle. Often, veterans and survivors did not talk much about their experiences until 40 or 50 years later, when the public square was flooded with films, stories, and other images of World War II and the Holocaust that they could easily and mistakenly adopt as their own memories, a phenomenon psychologists call misattribution. Why don't people in this situation come to realize that their memories have failed them? We all experience memory lapses, but for most of us, there are social mechanisms to help us correct them. My family and friends are not shy about pointing out my memory failures, but liberator and survivor testimony is socially privileged because social norms prohibit questioning or challenging justly venerated survivors or veterans. Their false memories keep getting reinforced instead of corrected. I don't think of these survivors and veterans as liars. I think they believe their false memories to be true. Mostly, these individuals have simply confused things they have heard, read, or imagined with their own experiences. Now, some distortions of the Buchenwald liberation story were more deliberate, rooted in collective social or political factors. Buchenwald was located in what would become East Germany, and the prisoner functionaries who ran the camp were mainly German communists. The so-called Selbstbefreiung, or self-liberation myth, evolved in East Germany as a way of legitimizing the communist East German government. This version of the liberation had a heroic group of communist prisoners overthrowing the SS by force 2 days before the arrival of American troops. It was a false story that served the political interests of the communist regime. In the US, many years later, the controversy over the role played in the liberation by African American soldiers arose when an episode for the American Experience series on PBS claimed that African American soldiers were the true liberators of Buchenwald as well as Dachau. This film was first screened in 1992 and was promoted as a way of bridging historical tensions between Jews and African Americans in the US. After 2 investigations, it was determined that the central claims of the film could not be substantiated, and the Oscar-nominated film, Liberators Fighting on Two Fronts in World War II, was withdrawn from public viewing. Of course, African American soldiers fought valiantly in segregated units in World War II and did visit Buchenwald, though most likely a few days after the liberation. How much survivor and veteran testimony is there that may contain false or distorted memories? Well, we don't really know, because while a great deal of survivor and veteran testimony has been gathered and preserved, many interviews transcribed and filmed, many to be found on YouTube and elsewhere, very little of it has been vetted. There are still Germans who believe the Selbstbefreiung myth, still Americans who believe the Liberators Fighting on Two Fronts story, and there are, and will be, many Americans who encounter the numerous news articles and stories about the false exploits of Rick Carrier and others on the internet for many years to come, and who will believe them. Does misremembering the Holocaust in this way matter? I think so, as deniers and revisionists do seize on discrepancies like these to cast doubt on historical truth. But I think truth also matters for its own sake. Memories that involve momentous historical events or individuals for whom we feel great respect and sympathy are not necessarily any more likely than any others to be accurate. Human memory is an amazing but imperfect faculty, and those imperfections affect Holocaust memories too. It is simply the case that some of the stories told by survivors and veterans are false. That this is so is not grounds for judgment of the involved individuals. In most cases, they are simply victims of the years and the circumstances and their very human memories. When institutions accept and store and promote survivor and veteran testimony, members of the public may mistakenly think that this acceptance and promotion carries with it a judgment of accuracy, an imprimatur of approval and validation, but for the most part it does not. Then where does all this leave us as we pass each milestone in the dramatic events of 75 years ago? With the realization that some of the survivor and veteran stories we will hear and read about, even when passed on by reputable Holocaust institutions, may be untrue. We may be tempted to think that the facts are secondary to the feelings, that there is a more fundamental truth that transcends historical detail. But awkward and unpleasant and uncomfortable as it may be when we are dealing with survivor and veteran testimony, I think the facts still matter. What do you think?